Hey guys, sorry I've been so inactive on YouTube lately, but once I get moved, I'll have a lot more time to put into it. Now this video might be made over the course of a few days, so the audio quality might change. I'm making this video because a guy on TikTok responded to me on his YouTube, and it's just gonna take so much time to respond to all of the lies he said in his videos, so I just have to do it here. I've encountered this guy several times in the past in which I've repeatedly dunked on him, and then he always comes back looking for more. And every single time, he makes the exact same mistakes. I think the number one problem is he doesn't read. And the points I've tried to stress in my videos responding to him is do not ever trust what a leftist says about research. Read the research for yourself. They will lie over and over and over. They will cherry pick, they will misquote, they will use bad data. Never trust them. Now let's just jump straight into his video.
So, Benjamin Politics, the devil himself, made a video responding to mine on worker co-ops, and boy is it bad. In fact, this seems to be a part of a series of videos trying to smear me and mislead people.
Ironic.
I wasn't planning on responding at first, largely for reasons listed in the comments of my last video on him, which is probably why he seems to think he can get away with being so dishonest, but I'm going to remind everyone exactly why you should block him and never listen to a thing he says.
This overview of 87 studies looks at state-owned, mixed, and private sectors and finds that there is no model of ownership intrinsically more efficient under any definition of efficiency, but there are differences within certain contexts. First thing to note here...
Nope, let me stop that right there. Ben's shifting the goalpost from the original video to make it seem off-topic. I was looking at the efficiency of public and private ownership, not whether deregulation would improve the result.
This is an example of leftists getting angry when you provide context or nuance to their claims. If you're trying to dunk on the libertarians and the capitalists by saying, oh, there's no real difference between efficiency in state or private-owned firms, but then you fail to take into account what we're actually advocating for, which is a free market and not government-sponsored private monopolies, then you've completely failed. In my video, I merely pointed out that there's a difference between just private ownership and an actual free market, and I used ERCOT and British Railways as an example. His paper even pointed to British Railways as an example of inefficient privatization. And I showed a paper that talks about how this isn't a good example because they're so highly regulated. So privatization in this context is completely useless.
And this study finds that worker co-ops are as much as 14% more efficient than conventional firms. This study he cited has a sample size of 7.
I also cited a review of 2 decades of international data which found that co-ops are more productive. Here's another meta-analysis that confirms this.
There are also more firms in this study than he suggests.
Here's the full quote since Ben deliberately cropped that out.
What's even more annoying than leftists randomly citing studies they never read is them randomly citing meta-analyses they've never read. Those will often cite dozens of other studies, and these leftists expect you to either take them at their word for it or go through each individual one. Frankly, I don't care for a bunch of random meta-analyses that have no significance and large amounts of sampling issues. Now going back to what he said about his one study he cited, now first of all let me point out this study was in 1995. Why is this important? We'll come back to that later. But anyways, he claims it had a larger sample size than 7, which is not true. These other firms are not co-op firms. The sample size of co-op firms is 7, just like his little cropped image shows.
According to a much larger analysis of worker cooperatives, published in the National Bureau of Economic Education.
Did he just say Bureau? Anyways, this study is actually about companies in which 5% or more of the stock is owned by employees, including 401k.
Actually,
This research paper is literally about labor having a voice in corporate governance. Labor meaning employees. It's about employees having a voice in corporate governance. What is a worker cooperative? It is a business in which the employees have the say in corporate governance. This is looking at the effects of employees having a say in corporate governance. Anyways, let's move on.
Ben also says worker co-ops underinvest, which is false.
No, that's not what I said. I said they invest less in long-term assets. I also said they take less risks. Both of those things are true.
Let's see now.
Co-ops invest less in long-term assets, take fewer risks, grow more slowly, create fewer jobs, and exhibit lower labor and total factor productivity.
I even gave reasons why this happens, mainly time preference. None of this is responded to, he just lies.
In this cross-industry analysis from Portugal, they found no evidence that co-ops were more productive than capitalist firms.
In other words, it finds that there is no difference in productivity.
No, it doesn't. It actually says worker cooperatives are significantly less productive. Once again, blatant lying.
Anyways, it should be noted that of the studies Ben cites, this is the only one from within the last 20 years.
Remember back when I told you to note the date on that paper he cited? Well, here's where it becomes relevant. Rules for thee, but not for me. This also is just a blatant lie, since the very one he just talked about was published in 2005. Another way he's incredibly dishonest and hypocritical is this first meta-analysis he cites is from a co-op organization. He criticizes me for citing quote-unquote biased sources. Yeah, okay, man.
This allows firms to actually expand and create new jobs, something that co-ops are terrible at.
This study does not compare between co-ops and private firms. They discuss how there is no control group in the method section, rather control variables. Ben doesn't seem to know the difference.
This was honestly one of the most confusing parts of his video. I feel like he literally just wanted to repeat some of the same words I said in my own video and was like, yeah, this was smart. This was a thing that actually makes sense. This totally refuted what he said. And he still did not critique my reason as to why worker cooperatives are not good at starting jobs. He also ignored the entire literature review portion of that paper I cited, which was the entire purpose of me citing it. And he ignored all of the evidence and the complete consensus that worker cooperatives are bad at creating jobs. Okay, anyways.
Co-ops are also generally worse for wages, in some cases having 14% lower wages than capitalist firms.
Ben is being misleading again. It says co-ops sacrifice higher wages for employment stability.
No, that's literally not what it says. Like, this guy's just reading something that's not even there. How can you be so dishonest and also so stupid that you put something on screen and says this, meanwhile, it doesn't?
In essence, when the economy's bad, most businesses will lay off a large number of workers to retain higher wages for a few. Co-ops tend to lower wages slightly in order to preserve jobs. In addition, when business is doing well, co-ops tend to pay their workers more rather than hire new ones, which explains the results from the previous study.
Wait, so I present evidence that in general, worker cooperatives have lower wages, and this guy's answer to why this is so is because when the economy is bad, they lower their wages instead of firing workers. He gives no evidence for this. He goes back to his earlier cited co-op meta-analysis, which said that these things were anecdotal and there's not actually data on this. And he says, yeah, they're generally lower wages because during bad economic times and recessions, they lower the wages. This doesn't make any sense. This guy literally cannot think.
And this larger view of over 95 worker cooperatives showed again wages were well below the rates of capitalist firms.
It doesn't seem like Ben even looked at the chapter whatever paper this is from cited. It's important to note that the sample businesses were very small. They don't make any use of statistical comparisons, nor do they try to eliminate external variables.
In my other studies, I pointed out the problematic small sample sizes, because I actually do that sort of thing rather than lie about it like this guy does. And this guy responds after he's already conceded to my argument that worker cooperatives have lower wages, and just starts spewing out random words to sound smart. I 100% guarantee you, this guy cannot define what an external variable is. He just says this stuff to try to sound smart, but this doesn't work on me.
So after my last video on Benjamin politics, I don't see why I should have to debunk anything he says. The sheer fact that it came from him should be enough reason for you to completely disregard it, but let's see what he has to say about socialist quality of life.
Over 2/3 of the time, more capitalism was associated with better quality of life.
First of all, that says economic freedom, not capitalism.
Wow, that's crazy, man. It's almost like it's literally the exact same thing. Capitalism is free markets and private ownership. Economic freedom is free markets and private ownership. Please keep up.
I also don't see how stable prices counts as economic freedom.
Sorry, I missed the part where you explain how under socialism you maintain stable prices and money. Anyways, next.
And I imagine its inclusion skews the results.
Citation needed.
Raise the lowest.
It's probably also quite skewed considering the only studies they reviewed were ones that cited the Economic Freedom of the World Index.
It says one or another version of the Economic Freedom of the World Index. There's multiple, not just the Fraser one. The Fraser one is probably the best one. Also, you keep saying, oh, it skewed it. Prove it. Prove this by any metric instead of just spewing diarrhea out of your mouth.
It's a survey by a libertarian think tank with a questionable track record.
This is a genetic fallacy. In no way is the data critiqued here. Also, this goes back to him citing a worker co-op organization in support of worker co-ops.
Note that among war and human rights, some of the variables found to be dependent on economic freedom
Were the number of supermarkets and magazines. That's what they're finding to be positively correlated to economic freedom, not quality of life.
It's almost like it gets worse every single time. This time he points out how in 2 of the papers, they looked at the number of supermarkets and the number of available magazines. This was literally 2 out of over 400. And the section he's talking about is the authors expressing how strange it was that these papers use these as the indicators. And then he says, oh, they do not look at quality of life, they look at these things. Again, this is 2 out of 400. If you actually read directly before this section that he cropped out, it literally says it's looking at things like GDP growth, income, poverty. This guy is so dishonest, it's ridiculous. He intentionally cropped this out and said, oh, this is about magazines.
This review is so biased.
As for communism, it's completely negatively associated with quality of life.
Notice how he says associated. This paper does not prove causation, nor was it aiming to.
It only includes these countries as a control for determining whether other factors like culture affect quality of life.
Again, I find this entire section extremely hilarious because I'm pointing out this huge negative association with communism and quality of life. This guy's like, well, yeah, there is a negative association, but that's because all of this other stuff. And that wasn't the intention of the paper. Which something he didn't mention is that it said communism is a better predictor of negative quality of life than culture itself. He ignores the fact that we actually present reasons as to why these things are negatively associated to communism. When you provide the arguments as to why communism is inefficient, they dismiss those arguments. When you provide the evidence that these arguments are true, again, they dismiss the evidence. It's ridiculous.
Communism means stateless, classless, moneyless, and socialist. The USSR was not that.
But bro, that wasn't real communism.
Soviets actually achieved a more nutritious diet than the Americans. Even the CIA admits this.
That's not what it says. It says they may. It's not from the CIA, it's from Reuters.
CIA.gov. Oh look, it's my source.
I have a really hard time believing that people can be this severely autistic. In 1984, the CIA published a classified document on the Soviet diet. This is a summary that was typed up by someone who works at Reuters. That's why it says Reuters at the top, and that's why it talks about the CIA in the third person. It was not written by a CIA operative. If it was, I challenge you to prove it. This is the paper it's actually referencing, and the paper it's actually referencing shows that the person who wrote out this summary was a complete moron because it does not agree with the summary.
By citing this report, you're conceding to the economic calculation problem.
Except I didn't cite that. Also, this doesn't at all prove that the ECP is significant.
Yes, you did cite it. By citing this summary about this research paper, you have cited the research paper. That's how it works. I know that may be hard to grasp for you, but that's how it works.
The Association for the Study of the Cuban Economy has several papers looking at Cuba before and after the revolution. Newsflash, the Castros did not improve a whole lot.
The first source confirms that Cuba does well on measures of human development.
No, it does not actually. In fact, immediately after this, where he cropped out, it talks about how this is a bad metric to use. This guy is such an idiot. How does he even think? It's like, hey, let me just cherry pick one sentence from an entire research paper and then say, yes, actually, this agrees with me. You see, this goes back to do not ever trust a leftist. Never do it. No exceptions.
It argues that Cuba isn't good because of a lack of political and economic freedom.
If you cannot prove it's good, I do not care about economic freedom.
As for issues with political freedom, this is not inherent to socialism. Left-wing libertarians aim to prevent this through decentralized revolution.
In the second source, there's a typo in the title. That is not a good sign of credibility. In fact, it was written by an American ambassador and Kirby Smith.
The only Kirby Smith Google knows died over 100 years ago.
Are you stupid?
The abstract is a Mises quote,
And of course, they fail to account for the effects of US imperialism.
Genetic fallacy, this guy complaining about a paper from 1994 which was digitized has a typo in it, as if that actually means anything, and he's upset that there's a quote by one of the most famous economists of all time. Of course, you cannot reference one of the most famous economists of all time in an economics paper. Everyone knows this. Ha! Ha ha ha. Also, this is a pretty dishonest way he presents it in his YouTube video, because in my original video I was responding to points he made on Cuba and debunking those individually. I was never trying to say, oh, we're going to ignore any of the effects the sanctions might have had. I was literally directly debunking outright lies that he made about Cuba.
Why does this self-proclaimed anarchist love military dictatorship so much?
I never said I was an anarchist.
But he didn't deny loving military dictatorships.
Also, Cuba actually has a great democratic system. If you want to learn more about it, check out this video.
After dismissing over 400 studies by economists because he thinks they are too biased, he cites socialist YouTube stickman. Okay.
Cuba already had one of the highest literacy rates in Latin America before Castro,
Okay.
and post-Castro it improved very slowly.
Maybe because it was already almost at 100%.
Again, this is the out of context thing. In his original video, he said that the Cuban literacy rate proves socialism is successful. I'm pointing out that clearly it does not, because it was already high and it didn't improve at a very fast rate under Castro. And now he's just like, oh, so what? This debunks your original point, so now you're conceding to my point and you are moving the goalpost.
Hugo Chavez's anti-poverty programs helped 20 million people.
Venezuela's poverty rate is 96%.
The collapse of the Venezuelan economy is unrelated. I'll make a video on it some other time.
Haha, yes. The collapse of the Venezuelan economy had nothing to do with all the social programs that were started and funded by the oil money. Absolutely nothing to do with it. Haha. Okay, now let's rewind back to the Cuba thing. He complained that my paper didn't account for quote-unquote US imperialism.
That was a lie.
So I'm actually going to bring up these two synthetic analyses, one for Cuba and one for Venezuela. They're meant to look at the economic effects of the Castro and Chavez regimes respectively. The Cuban regime, even when accounting for US sanctions, had a negative net impact on Cuba. A similar thing can be said for Chavez. Neither of these guys were good leaders. They were both dictators who ruthlessly murdered civilians. And this guy loves that. He loves people who are against communism being murdered. He gets off on that. He loves to sit here and blatantly lie to people. He loves to put up cropped images from research papers and say, this says this, when right in front of your face it says something else, because he thinks anyone who's not a communist is too stupid to read that and see if he's telling the truth. He also goes and gets people to write little scripts for him where he talks about things like external variables when he has no clue what that actually means. This is just classic pseudo-intellectualism, and this is why this guy refuses to have a live debate with anyone, because he can't pull out a script written by someone else for him. And look, if you're gonna get someone to write a script for you, at least get someone who's actually intelligent.